Okay, well, welcome back. I'm Tom Strong, President and CEO of CanBIM and Principal of Wired Construction. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we had a really great morning. Very happy with the quality of the presentations. I thought it was really engaging. I just want to say this, as I mentioned in our opening remarks, this topic is extremely important to our membership in this organization, and this is something that we continue to revisit. Sustainability is a subject that obviously affects us all. We're all experiencing the effects of climate change, and as a building industry, how we operate, how we measure success, what we ask for as clients, the culture that we create within our business. These are all extremely important topics on top of the technical things that we all do, of course. So we had some great presentations this morning regarding some of the technical things. We're going to have some executive speakers this afternoon. Very excited about our speakers, and I have the honor and privilege of introducing Tim Coldwell from Chandos Construction. Chandos is, if you're not familiar with the organization, they are a very progressive company. They operate almost all the way across Canada. They've always been market leaders, trailblazing IPD, use of BIM and technology. So they're a company that I've always paid a lot of attention to just because they've been so influential in the market. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before I forget them. These sessions are obviously live, and the benefit of that is that you can interact with the speaker. So please do that. Take advantage of that. That's really what makes it interesting for everyone. Anything can happen. And I think the speakers really enjoy it when they get challenging questions. So don't hesitate to ask questions. I'll manage the Q&A and try to facilitate your questions the best that I can. I just want to thank our sponsors. So we have a number of sponsors that make these sessions possible, especially our platinum sponsors: Building Point Canada, SolidCAD, and Autodesk Cloud, Construction Cloud. They're new. So we want to thank them very much. And I want to thank our hosts from this morning. I think they did a really excellent job. I want to thank SaskBIM for helping to organize the event. I think that's all the housekeeping I have. So Tim Coldwell has now joined us. Tim is the president of Chandos. He's been with Chandos. He's been with Chandos for 20 years, pretty much, right? And the organization is about 40 years old. He's overseeing the entire company, the 120 active job sites, and he's a leader in his own right, having led the marketing group and led innovation for the organization. So pretty excited about what you're going to talk about today. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that covers it off. I'm going to tell a little bit of my story in the presentation. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, great. I'm going to sign off here, and good luck, and we'll talk in a couple minutes.
Great. I'm just going to switch to my slides. Okay. Well, yeah, Tom, thanks for the introduction, and I'm really honored to be here today. When Jerry gave me a call, I said, wow, it'd be cool. Definitely excited to step through this. So this whole topic of sustainability, I think, is overly narrow in our industry. We tend to think of sustainability as LEED certification or carbon neutrality, or energy reduction and efficiency on projects. And I think we as an industry shouldn't broaden our definition of sustainability. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpack that through the rest of my presentation here today. I'm going to start out by telling my story, which is unique. So I'll start out with that. I'll touch on Chandos as an organization. Where I'm heading with this is that sustainable business models is really the way I think about sustainability. And so I'm going to unpack Chandos' strategy and what we do as an organization and how we think that is a sustainable business model. And then I'll bring it home with 3 trends that I think will define or start to define the future in our industry. And hopefully throughout the presentation, folks can get a little bit something from the presentation. And I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. So my story is unique. I've been with Chandos, as Thomas mentioned, for 20 years. I was literally 17 turning 18 when I started with the organization. I grew up in this world where I was taught to fear the other. My father was an independent fundamental minister. I was homeschooled. I did not see a television until I was 14 or 15. I couldn't play with the neighbors' kids because the neighbors' kids would corrupt me. Didn't listen to pop music, didn't go to the movies. That was the environment. I was encouraged to not get an education. But my saving grace is my mom taught me to read at a very high level at a young age. And so living in the middle of nowhere in northern Alberta, what are you going to do? Well, you go to the library. And it just so happened that in that particular library, the great classics were kept in the nonfiction section. And I wasn't allowed to go to the fiction section of the library because that could corrupt me. So nonfiction sections where I would hang out. And I was literally reading Encyclopedia Britannica when I was 10 or 11 years old. And in that section of the library, there was the great classics. So Dostoevsky, Immanuel Kant, Tolstoy, Plato, Machiavelli, those sorts of authors. I was smuggling that stuff home under cover of darkness, reading it with a flashlight. And, I was 15 years old, and 15-year-old boys fight with dad anyway. So, had that conversation with my father and decided to move out. And I was out, and I was on my own, and there was no way I was going to go crawling back. And so I know what it is like to not have a safety net. And it just so happened around that same point in time that I got a full ride scholarship from the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. I'm status Mohawk. Got a full ride scholarship to study engineering at the University of Alberta. And right around that same point in time as well, I got hired by Chandos. And I don't know where I would be today if it were not for the fact that I was hired by Chandos. I was, 17, turning 18. And I found a second family. I found a deep sense of purpose. I found a community in the construction industry, and has driven me over these years. And if there's one thing that I've taken throughout my entire life is this theme of seeking out people who are different and learning from people who are different from ourselves. I think that comes forward in Chandos as an organization. So we are a national technical builder that's purpose-driven. To give you a sense of scale, we entered this year with a sales target of $820 million. We're on track to do about 750-ish. With COVID, I think that's not that bad. We are 100% employee owned. We have a single class of voting shares, and ownership is open to anyone in the organization, including carpenters and laborers. We have about 500 employees, offices in Vancouver, Kelowna, Edmonton, Red Deer, Calgary, Toronto, and Ottawa. I'm based in our Toronto office. And essentially, we are doing geographic diversification. We were a Western Canadian contractor for 30 years. We'll hold the line in those markets at approximately $500 million. And we see 90% of the growth of the organization coming out of British Columbia as well as Ontario. We are also a certified B Corp. And for those who don't know what a B Corp is, think of it as a third-party verification that an organization walks their talk with regards to social and environmental impact. And here's how we kind of compare relative some well-known brands. Incidentally, we are the largest commercial contractor in the world that's B Corp certified. Our score is 107.4. And we have some aspirations of increasing that by about 30 points or so, to have us nipping on the heels of Patagonia, the most well-known B Corp that's out there. Part of how we think we're going to get there is the implementation of social procurement, or impact sourcing, as it's also called, as well as a commitment to carbon neutrality by 2030. And I'll get into that a little bit more here. So one other comment that I'll make is this, general contractors have what I call learned helplessness. For hundreds of years, contractors have been kind of taught, well, if the owner doesn't ask you to do it, you can't do it. If the architect doesn't put it in the spec book, you can't do it. And so contractors have just sat back in many instances and, said, if only, waiting for someone else to give them permission to innovate or do things differently. But I think general contractors are uniquely qualified to lead change in the construction industry. We sit at the center of the web. We have relationships with owners, we have relationships with designers, and we have relationships with the trades. That makes us uniquely qualified to innovate. And the kind of things that we're interested in, we can have diversity in the construction industry. We can recycle construction waste on our job sites. We can have a zero carbon footprint. We can implement social procurement at no premium cost to the Canadian taxpayer. And all of those things differentiate us as an organization. And when other contractors implement similar things, it also will differentiate them as well. Just in terms of our brand, I worked with Afdel Aziz, who's a world-renowned kind of specialist and expert in purpose-driven brands. And our purpose is we exist to build a better world. And our vision is to be the most collaborative and innovative builder in North America by 2030. Notice the words North America. We're very aspirational in how innovative we want to be. So we've looked south of the border in terms of mentor organizations. We don't currently have an intention to go to the United States, but we do believe that there are some contractors in the United States that frankly blow the doors off Canadian contractors in terms of innovation, and we certainly want to emulate them. We have some great relationships there. We have 4 missions. Most contractors would be a little bit navel-gazing on this. They would look inwards and they might have a mission around industrial or civil or a geographic market. We wanted to be more aspirational in terms of the missions of our organization. And so it starts with a company mission and then ladders outward in terms of larger reach. So our company mission is we are 100% employee owned, a B Corp certified national technical builder that balances people and profit. Our industry mission is to move industry towards collaboration by championing integrated project delivery and inclusive hiring. Our community mission is we help build thriving communities via community benefit agreements and social procurement. And in terms of the planet, we recycle waste on 100% of our projects and use sustainable construction techniques to minimize impact. Our values all start with inclusion. So get the right people around the table. And when you do that, and you are open to the idea that you may not be the smartest person in the room, collaboration occurs. And when collaboration occurs, the spark of genius happens, ingenuity, and great ideas are formed. And it's one thing to have a great idea. It's another thing to have the courage to actually implement that. And that's what innovation is all about. And so when you have the courage to implement that great idea, it moves the organization forward. And you have to include different people in the conversation. The cycle repeats itself. We think that this kind of a virtuous cycle in terms of values is a great way to describe what's near and dear to the heart of our organization. In terms of how we categorize the type of work that we do across Canada, we categorize it by the end user. Once again, many contractors would categorize it the way they think of it from a contractor's perspective, but we categorize our work from the user's perspective. So 5 major groups: play, work, serve, learn, and live. And I'm going to step through our geographic reach just so people have a sense of where we are and the kind of work that we do. So our Vancouver district is about a $200 million a year machine. The number one sector that they're involved in these days is the education sector. Edmonton includes the Arctic, and the number one sector there is the education sector again, about 150 million. Our Red Deer district includes the interior of British Columbia, 75 million in revenue, and Live includes seniors housing and student residences. We're doing a ton of that work in that geography these days. In Calgary, 125 million a year. Rec centers are a big piece in the Calgary market, and then office lab facilities would be number 2. Toronto, 125 million. This year, significant growth opportunities in the Toronto market. This district has the ability to dwarf the other districts in terms of size. Live, once again, is seniors housing, student residences, and we're doing a fair amount of rec projects in the Toronto district as well. Ottawa, 150 million. Number one base of clients there is the federal government. Our largest project is the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories redevelopment at Chalk River. 2 separate projects, both of them integrated project delivery. We're the managing partner on both of them. Mass timber, approximately 600 million total volume. We're partners with Bird Construction and Sullivan on those projects, and they're going very well. So switching back to our strategy as an organization, I mentioned at the top of this that our strategy is really about sustainable business models. So what do I mean when I say that? And so our strategy's got six major components. We just recently added a sixth one. And everything in our organization is rooted in our culture. We really compete on the soft stuff. A lot of contractors would go out there and compete on experience, or compete on a proprietary process that they think that they've kind of locked up. But really, everything in our world is about our culture, and that's rooted in our employee ownership. I mentioned we're 100% employee owned, single class of voting shares, ownership open to everybody, and 70% of the equity in the company is owned by non-executive individuals. So carpenters, laborers, project managers, superintendents, estimators, that group of people owns 70% of the equity, as opposed to some rich people in the corner offices controlling all the equity and giving the bare minimum to the people who are actually doing the work. We're the exact opposite of that. And so that idea that it's not my company, it's our company, is shot through the entire organization. There's a tight connection with that and the B Corp principles. As I mentioned, B Corp is around the planet, as an example, carbon neutrality, construction waste diversion on 100% of our projects, those sorts of things. And B Corp also carries inside of it the diversity and inclusion metric, or this idea of making the organization look like Canadian society as a whole. So that's a significant piece of our strategy. The thing that we're probably the most well known for in Canada is integrated project delivery. We're the leader in Canada by a significant margin. We've got 29 of those projects with a value of about 1.6 billion to our credit rate now, and we see no slowdown in demand for that delivery method in Canada. Social procurement, or impact sourcing as it's is alternatively known, is something that we recently added into the mix. I worked very closely with Senator Omabar on Bill C-344, the Community Benefit Agreement bill, and I'll explain how that can have significant impact in the construction industry and how it differentiates Chandos. We have a special projects group, and we really come at special projects from a national perspective. We do the 5,000 square foot TI in a geography, but what we're really after is the national rollout of 20 or 30 different locations for a single client who wants a trusted advisor to help them roll out across Canada. We have an extensive resume in that kind of work, and those kinds of clients are very good clients to have. So that's a significant piece of our strategy. That SSG group contributes significant margin to the bottom line, and supports many of the great things that we do as an organization. And then co-located prefab, many contractors in Canada, you see them in the news, have purchased fab facilities and they're doing volumetric modular. We're of the view that component prefab is the future, and instead of buying a building and doing that, we're doing it in a co-located fashion with trades in temporary space, leveraging the delivery method that we have at our disposal through IPD. We've got more IPD than anyone in Canada, and that method allows us to do some really cool things from a prefab standpoint. So we're certainly leveraging that. Our marketing approach is to do large thought leadership events. And so there's some pictures from an event that we did a year and a half ago. We ran a series of events called Industry with Purpose, almost 3,000 attendees across Canada, a bit of a road show. And we get significant new clients and opportunities through this approach to building brand in the Canadian industry. So I'm going to shift gears here. And now that I've given some context on myself and Chandos as an organization, as well as Chandos' strategy, I'm going to shift to these three themes that I mentioned. And one of the big things that I want to start out with is this idea of exponential change. And Peter Diamandis is one of the co-founders of Singularity University. And exponential change is this idea that your brain can't contemplate or make sense of the rate of change that's out there in the world, largely driven by technology advancement. And so the classic example that everyone I'm sure has seen is New York City in the early 1900s. Everyone's running around with horses and buggies. There's some vague conversation about the automobile. Everyone in the horse and buggy business was, yeah, whatever. maybe 20, 30, 50 years from now, when pigs fly, those automobiles will be a thing. 10 years later, that's what New York City looks like. And I think that this kind of change is accelerating, in the current context, largely driven by technology advancement. And so I just put that out there, that a lot of people, when they hear about the future, or when they hear someone talk about, well, we think this thing in the future is going to be something to keep an eye on, in their mind, they think 20 or 30 years in the future, when I think they should be thinking 5 and 6 years in the future. That's the message that I want to start with here. And so here are the 3 themes that we think will define the future. And just let me pause for a second and talk about strategy. So when strategy at the corporate level is not about the plan. Strategy is really about how you are going to be different in the future. And, in the future, I would say is at least 5 years in the future. And fundamentally, you have to have a set of principles in terms of how you're going to think about the future. And essentially, strategy is, within the context of that set of principles, a bet on what that future will be. And you're trying to get your organization out in front of that future, so you have a first mover advantage, and so you have differentiation. That's really what strategy is about. These 3 themes that I'm going to unpack, I believe, will really start to drive differentiation in the business world. And so they're really organized around employees, companies, and the demographics of Canadian society. And so let's start with the employees. And this is really generational. And I think, I'm tired of hearing all the stories about how millennials are different, and you have to engage millennials and this and that and the other thing. I think when you go back to the ages, the Stone Age, or the time of the emperors, there were old people talking about kids these days and rolling their eyes. It's just a reality of what happens is the values from generation to generation change, and they swing around. And when that tipping point occurs from one generation to the next, there's significant opportunity that surfaces in the business world and in society. And so really what we're talking about is millennials and Gen Z. And so I was born in 1982. So I am officially a millennial, kind of an old millennial. And I think one of the things that I would say really drives this is that the kids these days, if we're going to call them that, they're after purpose and meaning. It's no longer good enough just to go and punch a clock like your grandparents or your parents did. It's about self-actualization through the work. One of the stats that I heard a year or so ago that really blew my mind, related to millennials and Gen Z, is that 85% of that demographic believe that businesses have a moral obligation to address society's greatest issues. That idea is completely foreign to the boomers and the Gen Xers. And I think that idea starts to drive much of differentiation in the construction industry moving forward. As I mentioned, people want to feel part of something bigger than themselves. This idea of passion. People want to do meaningful work with tangible outcomes. And it's not about work-life balance. It's about work-life integration. And one of the things that we're starting to explore as an organization is the idea of job purposing. So if an individual has a personal purpose, let's just say about weaving baskets. I'm going to be facetious here. How can that purpose around weaving baskets be expressed in their job at Chandos as a project manager, as a superintendent, as a carpenter, as a laborer? How can we as an organization help those individuals express their personal purpose in life? Figuring that out will frankly help organizations win the war for talent. One other thing with the younger generation coming into the workforce these days is technology. I view technology as an extension of myself, and it's just something that's there that makes life easier. A very different viewpoint than many in the world. One other thing is this idea that collaboration is inevitable. There's nothing worse in my mind than going into the office, duking it out with an architect or an owner over some change order. And so I think that this movement that's been defined by the sharing generations is really a shift in towards a collaborative delivery methods. And you start to see things like integrated project delivery. Integrated project delivery 8-9 years ago was 0% of the Canadian market share. Today, it's approximately 2.2 billion, and Chandos' share of that is 1.6 billion. The Canadian market didn't know that they wanted integrated project delivery until they saw it. And then once they saw it, they're like, okay, there is a better way. And we want to do this. One of the other things that we learned through this process is everyone told us government owners are not able and willing to change. There's no way that you're going to modernize procurement. There's no way that you're going to get away from low bid selection. I would say of our 1.6 billion of IPD work, all but 4 of those owners, so all but 4 of our 29 projects are taxpayer funded with public dollars behind it, and it's public civil servants making the decision and having the courage to use an alternative delivery method because they believe that life is too short to go into the office and duke it out over change orders, and they believe that there is a better way to do this. And I would also connect this to the generational shift. In many instances, those public owners who are making those decisions to use this delivery method are millennials or Gen Z. They're increasing in their power in the civil servant as civil servants, and they're driving change in the construction industry as they take on those roles. And last piece here, virtual design and construction. As I mentioned, using IPD as a delivery method allows us to do some really interesting things in terms of technology. And one of the main things that we think is really important is to bridge the gap between the younger generation that's super adept at technology and the superintendent or the foreman or the craft worker that's been doing the job for 40 years, putting together HVAC. They've forgotten more about how HVAC goes together than our BIM modelers know. The secret there is to connect that historical knowledge that lives in the minds of those people that are doing the work with the folks that are doing modeling and those sorts of things. And we do that in many ways through our delivery methods. So my message in terms of employees is the main connection here, I think, is that we want to make sure that we leverage the passion and the purpose of this younger generation, but we also connect them with those who have gone before and capture that knowledge before it goes out the door. Moving to the next one. So this idea around companies and the idea that in the new world, companies will be expected by their employees to take a stand. I'm going to just pause here for a moment, and I'm going to play a brief video by Bill George. And Bill George is a Harvard business professor. He wrote a book called True North, and he was this past CEO of Medtronics. I'm going to mute my microphone and play the video.
There's a big change taking place in CEOs today because they have the courage to stand up for what they believe in and be outspoken about. There was a time when everyone kind of hunched down and didn't hunker down and didn't want to say anything and go below the radar screen. Now I think they feel it's so purposeful. I'm giving you an example of someone who did that. Ken Frazier, CEO of Merck, was so offended by President Trump's comments after Charlottesville that he resigned from his council, and he now didn't do it quietly. He put out a statement, and you realize that everything Merck does, their whole purpose is often dependent on approvals from the U.S. government for every new drug, quality, pricing, and so it is an example of extreme moral courage. But I think more and more CEOs are having the courage to find their voice and stand up for what they believe in. Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, stands up and says he will not accept what's going on in Indiana or North Carolina with discrimination against people that are LGBTQ. And so he has that courage to find his voice. Mark Benioff, the same way, at Salesforce, and I have such admiration. If your company has a purpose, you've got to stand up and be counted. You've got to say, this is wrong. And so I think you have to find your voice and have that courage. Do the right thing. Do you take a risk? Absolutely. But if you don't, the greater risk is that you don't believe in anything and your employees watch what you do. After the Parkland shooting, what's your feeling about guns? I want a safe neighborhood. I want safe kids, safe schools for our employees' kids to go to school in. My own kids. And I want it to be a safe place. So that's a community question. Our community's got to come together and ensure the safety of our young people. If we don't, who will?
There we go. Got to unmute myself. This idea that companies need to stand up and have moral courage to take a stand on social issues. The first beginnings of that started in 2006 with Michael Porter. Michael Porter is the modern father of strategic thinking. He's a Harvard business professor. He basically wrote the book on strategy. His 5 forces model is awesome. And in 2006, he started to talk about this idea of shared value. And he started to think about, instead of businesses existing just to create a profit, like Milton Friedman, shareholder supremacy, instead of that being the case, what if businesses, and you exist, you create a profit, you make a bunch of money. At the end of the year, you want to feel good, so you cut a check to a charity. And, that was kind of the definition of corporate social responsibility for some time. And Porter really started to expand that and said, well, what if the businesses solved some of the biggest social problems in the world through their business model and were more profitable? And the reason, he was interested in that is when you solve some of the biggest social problems in the world with a business model and you make a profit at it, you can scale it and you can keep scaling it and you can keep scaling it. The model of businesses making a profit and then cutting a check to a charity is not scalable. So this idea of solving some of the world's biggest social problems through your business model was started in 2006 with Michael Porter. In 2007, B Labs was founded. Andrew Kasoy, Bart Houlihan, and Jay Cohen Gilbert. They were the founders of And One Shoes, and they sold And One Shoes to a bunch of hedge fund guys. And One Shoes is widely considered to be the first socially responsible brand in the United States. And when they sold out to the hedge fund guys, they found that after the transaction closed, all the things that made them special as an organization disappeared. The jobs were offshored to foreign manufacturing. The community connections disappeared. Some of the really progressive policies in terms of workforce participation disappeared. And they felt, frankly, I think, racked by some guilt. And they said, what are we going to do as an encore? And so they founded B Labs. And B Labs, as I mentioned, is an organization that exists to be third-party verification that an organization actually walks their talk in terms of social and environmental responsibility. So in 2006 and 2007, Porter and the B Lab guys were really starting to roll around on this idea of purpose. And it was kind of lesser known, and it was there, but there in the background. And it didn't really take off in mainstream business until 2017, when Larry Fink wrote in his 2017 letter to CEOs, was entitled A Sense of Purpose. And Larry Fink is the chairman of BlackRock, the largest institutional investor in the world, and frankly, the largest investor in the world, period. I believe they have about 7 trillion of assets under management. And in 2017, Larry Fink said to the organizations in which they invest in, we will not invest in you unless you have diversity on your board, unless you're doing good things for the planet, unless you have a sense of purpose and you're addressing some of society's greatest challenges through your business model. We believe that that's key for sustainability in the business world, and we are not going to invest in you unless you do that. So when Larry Fink says those sorts of things, people on Wall Street sit bolt upright, and all of a sudden the agenda started to move forward much quicker. In 2019, there was a lot of waves that were made with the Business Roundtable in the United States. That's 200 of the largest Fortune 500, 200 organizations, members of the Fortune 500, all made a commitment to broaden the definition of the purpose of a corporation from Friedman's shareholder supremacy to stakeholder supremacy. And Jamie Dimon is the chair of the Business Roundtable. That movement away from pure bottom line thinking to how can our organization solve some of the greatest problems in the world is really foundational. And we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in that respect. As I mentioned, consumers are demanding that businesses take a stand on social issues. So you see the Black Lives Matter conversation that's occurring right now. In Canada, Indigenous rights are also a significant issue in the Canadian context. And you see in the United States, Facebook employees, Google employees walking out and staging strikes where 20,000 employees walk off the job because the behavior of their employer is not aligning with their personal values. These sorts of things will start to define the business landscape of the future. And more recently, Nike, among many others in the United States, taking on the Washington Redskins, as well as sponsors with the Edmonton Eskimos. There has been conversations about these names are racist and we should change the names, but it never really happened until the companies cutting a check for sponsorship stood up and took a stand on the issue and said no more. And it happened overnight as soon as that occurred. So businesses are starting to wake up to the expectation that they participate in these sorts of conversations in the Canadian society. One of the best examples I have, and I want to share one last video before I wrap this up, of an organization that is really driving social purpose is Adidas. So many people will know about Adidas's partnership with Parley for the Oceans. Essentially what they did is they developed a running shoe in partnership with an NGO, and the NGO was fishing ocean plastic out of the ocean. And they decided to develop a running shoe that was made from 11 plastic bottles. And so the soles of these shoes are made out of these bottles. And Adidas had this idea of, maybe selling 500,000 pair of these things in the first year. And when they released them for almost $250 American. And they blew the doors off of sales expectations. And it's 3 or 4 years in now, and they've sold something like 30 or 40 million pairs of these shoes at $200 or $300 a pop. That's billions of dollars of incremental income for Adidas. And they're now one of the largest recyclers of ocean plastic in the world. And they helped an NGO scale far more than they ever thought that they could. One of the things that they're doing more recently is they've taken it to the next level, and they've figured out how to weave fabric from bottles fished out of the ocean. And so the jerseys that they wear in FIFA these days are made from recycled plastic from the ocean. And they've just recently developed a circular economy shoe. So you buy the shoe for like $500 American, and they ship it to you in a special envelope. You wear the shoe. When you're done with it, you put it in the envelope, you ship it back to Adidas. They grind it up and make it into a new shoe. And it's a complete circular economy. This idea of solving some of the world's biggest problems while making more profit is really what the future of the business world starts to look like. I'm going to mute myself again.
If we can see things for what they are, if we can see what they could be, if the plastic we use, we never throw away, if the end of one thing could be the beginning of the next. If we know that less can create more. If we can return, we reciprocate, we regenerate. If we are here for others, if we can work as a team, all we have to do is connect, and the world opens up. The future is about giving back.
Yeah, the main point there is the future is about giving back, and this idea of how can businesses give back through their business model, I think is very important. And so how Chandos does this, I would encourage people who are interested in this to think about what you do that touches society and think about how you could tweak that just a little bit to drive more value. So here's a picture of some of our journeyman carpenters working with 2 Indigenous apprentices. And this is a connection to my own personal story. Chandos can hire anyone to be a laborer in our organization for $18, $19 an hour. Let's hire the kid that's riding the bus 3 hours a day back and forth to school, working 2 part-time minimum wage jobs trying to put food on the table for a brother or a sister because mom and dad aren't around. Let's hire that kid. And when we do that, we can put that individual in our apprenticeship program. Apprentice carpenters are $20-some an hour, $24 an hour, depending on where you are in Canada. Journeyman carpenters are pushing $40 an hour in the GTA, mid-30s in Western Canada. And we can take someone who is on a path towards crime and or poverty and put them on a career, on a path towards a high-paying job in the construction industry in a matter of 4 or 5 years. And it costs us nothing to do that. We're going to hire those people anyways. And then what we get on the flip side of that is we get a workforce that is incredibly engaged, and they're thankful for the opportunity that they've been given. They come to work with a big smile on their face, and they have a sense of purpose, and they have a sense of community in the organization. And when we do that as an organization, the productivity of those individuals blows the doors off of pretty much anyone else. And you start to talk about a self-performed concrete crew that's comprised of 70% folks who came from an at-risk youth background, who love their job because it's connected to their personal passions and their personal purpose. And they have a connection to the company because the company gave them an opportunity. That starts to be a huge differentiator in the war for talent. So my message here is from a business standpoint and as a company, if you want to have a sustainable business model, you need to define what you believe in, and you need to be willing to stand up for it. And so I'm going to finish with a last piece on demographics. And so here's the historical population of Canada since the Second World War till today. And here's a forecast from Stats Canada that shows where it's expected to go, 70 million by 2068. And this is important for the construction industry because the single greatest predictor of construction activity is population growth. And just think about this. In the next 50 years, we need to build twice as much stuff that already exists in Canada, and we need to fix the infrastructure deficit, all while junior high kids are not really that interested in going into careers in the trades. We as an industry have an issue that we need to address. This is not a new concept. I actually learned about what I'm about to describe here about a year and a half ago, and it absolutely blew my mind. There's a large body of work in Canada around demographics, and that body of work would suggest that Canada needs a population of 100 million by the year 2100 to hold our current standing in the G7, and also to pay the tax bill of retiring baby boomers who are going to have increasing life expectancy. The only way that this country is going to get to that kind of population growth is through immigration. And yet we have politicians wandering around talking about closing the borders, fear the other people are coming to take your job away from you. That is not the reality. We need people to come to this country, and we need people to be part of this society, and we need people to pay taxes so that we can continue to grow and prosper as a nation. So there's an organization, if you're interested in this, called the Century Initiative. It was co-founded, I should say, by Dominic Barton. And I've had the pleasure of meeting with him a couple of times now. So Dominic Barton was the Canadian CEO of McKinsey. I should say the CEO of McKinsey, and he was the first time a Canadian was the CEO. And he recently was appointed as Canada's ambassador to China more recently. And the Century Initiative is a think tank, essentially, around what Canadian society needs to look like by 2100 if we are to hold our standing in the global stage. As I mentioned, this book that underpins, this book is probably the best single summary of the demographics that I mentioned. Maximum Canada, Why 35 Million Canadians Are Not Enough by Doug Saunders. I would encourage you to purchase this and think through it. One of the other things, and I don't want to diverge here, is while Canada does need to have a population that's headed towards 100 million in the next 80 years, the other thing that's happening in the world is there's a prediction that the population of the world will start to shrink by the year 2064. So just think about that. As the birth rates around the globe decline, population will start to shrink. And in some parts of the world, cities will start to be empty, and there'll be more mobile people. So those people have a choice in terms of where they want to live in the world. And we need to compete for that talent on a global stage to maintain our position and our prosperity as a nation. And, it's interesting in the United States, I'm not going to get into American politics, but the Americans temporarily paused the H-1B visa. And the H-1B visa is the visa that most tech workers use to enter the United States and work in Silicon Valley. The response to that has been great for Canada in that the tech companies in Silicon Valley have amped up their investment in north of the border in Canada. And so those individuals who thought they were going to go to San Francisco are now going to Toronto, Vancouver, Kitchener, Waterloo, and Ottawa. And they're all coming to Canada, and they're all going to pay taxes, and they're all going to be part of Canadian society. And we think that's great for the businesses of the future. So it's probably the single greatest opportunity here in the next 20 or 30 years from a population standpoint that Canada has in front of ourselves. And organizations who understand this and get out in front of it will certainly reap the benefits. So I'm going to finish with this kind of a comment here. If you want to have a sustainable business model, really what this conversation around population and demographics is your organization needs to look like Canadian society. And the construction industry is not necessarily the most diverse industry that's out there. So when you're talking about looking like Canadian society, 5% of the Canadian population is Indigenous. 20% of the Canadian population is visible minority. Approximately 8% of the Canadian population is LGBTQ, and 50% of the Canadian population is women. Organizations should look at what their demographics are inside of their doors and compare that to what's outside of their doors in Canadian society. And the goal should be to close that gap. That is going to be very, very difficult. It is going to be the hardest challenge that we face as an organization. But when you look like the society in which you're operating, you will certainly have an edge in relation to organizations that do not. And so 3 big themes that we think really define sustainable business models. There's this idea of around employees and their shift in values and their desire to see their personal purpose expressed in the organization that they work in. Related to that is this idea that companies have to support the values and the purpose of their employees, or they will pay the price. You have to take a stand for what you believe in. And then the demographics that underpin all of it is a shift towards a more diverse workforce and a global competition for talent, and organizations that look like the society in which they operate will certainly win out at the end. Those are the 3 big themes that we see in terms of sustainable business models. So I'm going to end with this and just kind of a bit of a call to action. What if all of us started to shift our organizations to a more sustainable business model? What would that mean for our cities? What would that mean for our industry? What would that mean for our country? And what would that mean for the planet? Thank you very much.
So many things to highlight in your presentation. I really appreciate it. It's really great to have you here talking about the subject matter. I think it just makes it just elevates the discussion so much. So I just really appreciate your presentation. I just want to remind everyone in the audience, we are taking questions. So if you've got questions, feel free to type them into the panel and I'll try to work those into the conversation. So Tim, I guess the first thing I want to ask, I mean, you've got a reputation as an organization to doing a lot of IPD work. How has that advanced your ability to inject sustainable culture into the business process of designing and building?
Yeah, I would say it might be actually the other way around. We were attracted to IPD. I have some connections in the U.S. and the Bay Area, and I haven't really worked anywhere else other than Chandos. So what do I know about building an organization that's headed towards $1 billion? But I have some really good friends in the U.S. who are at the next level. So I was part of that whole world, and that's where I first heard and learned about IPD. And what immediately struck me is I said, man, the culture of Chandos is set up for this perfectly.
Yeah.
This idea of it's not my company, it's our company. And in the IPD context, it's not my project as the owner, it's our project. It's very, very unique, and it's very cultural in terms of how you do it. So we were attracted to it from that standpoint. I would say I believe our culture and the people that we have makes us uniquely qualified for that delivery method. There's probably barriers to entry there that we've developed. Our approach has been to not have a group of experts, but we call it operationalize it. So to push that way of being through all the project teams, so they're not reliant on a handful of facilitators. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. I think it's really the intersection of our culture and how you best do those projects in an IPD context.
Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, your culture as a business is very unique, and especially unique for the construction industry. You know, you've taken this position somewhat recently in the course of the company's history, but this culture has been around for a long time. Like you've always been on the cutting edge and driving change and setting an example. You know, has there been more recently a shift around some of these things, or how did the company develop this culture initially that was open to thinking more progressively, and then how has it evolved over time, and has it been accelerated by, you know, current events?
Yeah, I would say it's certainly, I don't want anyone to think that this is Tim Coldwell's thing. It's been here much longer than me. Chandos is, you know, we're named after a lake in Ontario, Lake Chandos outside of Peterborough. The founder of the company was a guy named Dan O'Brien, and Dan had this thing in his personality that he would do the exact opposite of what the industry was doing. There's kind of this belief that, you know, people are lemmings. I might be a crass way of saying it. So he always challenged the status quo, thought outside of the box, did things differently. And that was the founding principle of the company. And the company was always founded on this idea of employee ownership. And then my immediate successor, Tom Rettle, came to us from the commercial real estate space. So did not have much the baggage that you often have as a construction executive, and had been an owner. You know, he was developing shopping centers, and Chandos was one of his builders. And so he jumped at the idea of taking the reins of the organization. What Tom brought is he took this idea that Dan had of looking out for each other as a family, so to speak. Tom broadened it out to 100% employee ownership, the widely held equity model that we have right now, a single class of voting shares. And so that was kind of the piece there. And then Tom was also very heavily involved in United Way in charitable concerns. He and I both sat on campaign cabinet for United Way. And then as I took on more responsibility in the company, you know, B Corp became kind of evidence that we walked the talk.
Right.
And more recently, this idea of our business model can actually solve some of the biggest challenges in society. So I would view it as an evolution over time.
Mm-hmm. So I would love to be able to talk to you for like a whole hour of all the things that came up, but we are kind of approaching the end of the hour here. I mean, some of the things that I want to highlight that you mentioned was, you know, defining what you believe in as an organization. That's a takeaway for me personally, as I set up my business and I help to, you know, chair our organization here at CanBIM. I think that's so important. And we think about our branding, we think about our marketing and how we present the clients. And there's a whole different spectrum you have to think about especially when you're in this war for talent, as you mentioned. I like what you said about, you know, collaboration in creating that and being a culture that you need to create, and how that actually attracts people who don't want to be in combative situations. Yeah, and of course, like purpose driving the whole organization, and the moral obligation of corporations being something that is now kind of fundamental on how we all think and operate. I mean, I was looking at your demographic slide there, and I think I'm technically somewhere. I think I'm an X, maybe millennial. I don't know. But I do think that way, and I do think it's important. I think, and I think you're right in highlighting that the difference on older people or people who have been in the corporate world longer, how foreign that would be for them to think that their corporation should be doing something other than just making money. Yeah. And you know, I think it's really inspiring. I like what you talked a little bit about the circular economy. One challenge I have for you, one thing you didn't mention was, you know, this model that Tom Shoes pioneered, this 1-for-1 model. I mean, that would be so interesting to somehow execute that into your corporation here. Maybe you build a condo in downtown Toronto, maybe you build some low-income housing somewhere else. So I'll leave that with you.
There's an organization, check out World Housing. It's a thing already.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing. So anyways, lots I wish we could chat about here, but really appreciate your time and excellent presentation. I'm going to give everyone a little bit of time to switch over to the president of Lafarge, who's speaking next, And I want to thank our sponsors once again, Autodesk Construction Cloud, Building Point Canada, and SolidCAD for helping to make this possible. And all these sessions are going to be recorded. They're going to be on our website. They're going to be available. So if you enjoyed this, please share it with others. Let people know what we're doing here, and invite other people, because the more people that we have that get this kind of information, the more this message can spread, and we can influence the industry. Anyway, so Tim, thank you very much, and we'll talk soon.
Great. Thanks for having me.